One. Welcome to our first virtual town hall meeting for Brookline businesses and nonprofits of 2021. I'm Kara Bruton, Economic Development Director for the town of Brookline, and I'm filling in for Select Board Member Raul Fernandez, who chairs the town's Small Business Development Committee and typically hosts these meetings. Select Board Member Fernandez unfortunately had a scheduling conflict this morning. He sends his regrets and is looking forward to hosting our next meeting, which will be on February 4th. Economic development staff have a few updates for you, which we'll share after discussion and Q&A with our guest speaker. We're excited to welcome Brookline State Representative Tommy Vitolo. This morning, Rep. Vitolo participated in several of our virtual town halls with the Brookline business community back in the spring and summer. We're fortunate to have him with us again this morning to provide a legislative update after an incredibly busy week on Beacon Hill. Many important pieces of legislation were passed this week as the legislature wrapped up its two-year session, including an economic development package, which includes several key provisions for small businesses, a transportation bill, and climate change legislation. So Representative Vitolo, welcome back, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.
It's a pleasure to be here, and 9 o'clock is not too early for me, although I will note that on Monday, we did the climate bill. On Tuesday, we were in session from noon until 4:30 a.m. because the session ended on Tuesday, and we decided that Tuesday actually ended Wednesday, 4:30 a.m. We had work to do, and we did it, and it was a lot of work, and I'm very excited. There's a lot of language to process, and Kara, as you mentioned, there's an economic development bill, there's a transportation bond bill that includes some revenue unusually, and there is an economic development bill. There was also a variety of other bills that are passed, more specific, that maybe we won't have time to get into today, but I'm happy to sort of give you the highlights, and I want to be clear. None of the bills that I'm talking about today have been signed by the governor, to my knowledge, as of Thursday at 9 a.m. That doesn't mean that I necessarily expect he will or won't, but that he hasn't yet. So it's not the law. Furthermore, because the 191st session did end Tuesday night, if the governor does not sign, it does not become law. It's called a pocket veto, and the governor does not have the ability to line item amend the language because the session that passed the bill is over. This is not normally an issue because normally the session's work expires in the end of July when we would have the rest of the calendar year. But because we extended the regular session due to COVID, we lost so much time legislating in the spring and summer. We have this dual deadline that's going to cause some trouble. So we don't know what the governor is going to do. I fully expect he'll sign the economic development bill. I fully expect he'll sign the transportation bond bill. It is not obvious to me that he will sign the climate bill. I think he should. I think it's a great bill. And I think it's consistent with his vision and his way of doing things as well. I don't think there's inconsistencies there. Substantial inconsistencies, but he hasn't signed it. So the climate bill we'll get into first, and I won't spend too much time on it. There weren't a ton of surprises in that everything had been discussed either in the House or the Senate. What was surprising was that so much of it was included. It would have been easy to do a bill that had half those number of items and said, we did our job, but substantially more was included. The highlights that I think are the most important for this group are, number one, the roadmap is clear. We're going to have emissions targets every 5 years, and we need to have a 50% emissions reductions relative to 1990 levels by 2030. That's in the law. 75% by 2040, and be net zero by 2050. DOER, the Department of Energy Resources, Environmental Resources, Energy, Environment. DOER has to have targets every 5 years as well, but they have a little flexibility in setting those. These are slightly more aggressive than the targets the governor proposed just a week or two ago. So they're not really inconsistent. They're a little bit more aggressive for 2030. The bill has some gas safety. The bill has some renewable requirements. The bill increases the amount of offshore wind that the large electric companies Eversource, Unitil, National Grid will have to procure substantially more offshore wind, so that's exciting. Has a significant amount of economic development, workforce development, job training in the bill, right? The recognition is that both white collar and blue collar workers, tens of thousands of them in Massachusetts, are going to transition our economy and our society to one that doesn't emit greenhouse gas emissions. Tens of thousands of workers. We're talking about architects and people in the building trades. We're talking about engineers and factory workers. We're talking about planners and doers, if you will, Kara. I'm just picking on you. And so we've got to train those folks. We've got to make sure they have the tools to continue to be productive and to transition our economy in a low-cost way, right? We don't want to chase our tails. We don't want to do the hard, expensive things first. We want to do the easy things first. We want to be ahead of the game and do it right the first time rather than redo it. And there's quite a bit there. And I'm proud to say that I worked with Senator Harriet Chandler in drafting some of that language. So that was really exciting. The other thing that I want to mention, and this is especially relevant to Brookline, is that the bill includes language that requires DOER in consultation with BBRS, the state organization that creates the building code, to create a net zero appendix to the building code and allow municipalities the right to opt in to that code community-wide. So you recall warrant article 21, this sounds a lot like that, right? Except rather than have the select board figure out who has to do what and who gets the exemption, a state agency with expertise, the BBRS, is going to do that. So I think that's a real improvement and something the town couldn't have done on its own. It required the state. Furthermore, net zero, remember we had this fossil fuel free provision where you wouldn't use fossil fuels to heat water or heat space. This is actually slightly more expansive than that, but because it's net zero rather than fossil fuel free, it leaves a little bit more flexibility for developers to figure out the way they want to do it. Right. So I think it's actually an improvement there, both in that it calls for even greater emissions reductions, but gives the building owner, the building designer, the building constructor more flexibility in how he or she wants to achieve that. So I think that's a real benefit. This language didn't fall out of the sky. Representative Kaycon of Newton and I filed an amendment to the House bill on July 30th. Recall it was roughly July 20th that Attorney General Healy stated that the Brookline bylaw could not go into effect because it was not in agreement with several state laws, and that state law would have to be updated. And so Representative Khan and I filed an amendment 10 days later. That amendment was not ultimately part of the House bill because our colleagues had a whopping week to come to terms with this idea, to think about how it would work, to try to make sure everything was lined up, and it wasn't enough time. And so we didn't get the amendment in the bill in July, but we got it in the conference bill in January, right? And so it took those extra 6 months, but it's there. If Governor Baker signs this into law, I fully expect that in 2021, DOER will promulgate these rules. There will be quite a bit of lobbying to determine what will be in and out and how it will work. They'll have to do it within a year of the bill becoming law. And so that would say, let's call it January 1st, 2022. And then any municipality in the Commonwealth will then have the ability to opt in through their city council or through their town meeting to this code. And I fully expect that there will be several dozen communities who will opt in immediately, and then many dozen more a year or two later. And that was our experience with the stretch energy code, where initially about a dozen communities signed in. And at this point, something like 90% of Massachusetts residents live in a community that is using the stretch energy code, which again is a municipal opt-in. So that's the climate bill. There's a lot more there. I could talk for hours about it, but we don't want to do that this morning. We did a transportation bond bill as well. The transportation bond bill was necessary to keep transportation projects moving, and obviously interest rates are so incredibly low right now that if you're ever going to borrow money for long-term projects, now is the time to do it. There are some important changes to MBTA operations. There are some nice language regarding the Throat, which is the highway and railway project in Alston, sort of Harvard Yards, making sure that that's done well. And I want to emphasize to this group in particular, that is a tremendous opportunity for Brookline. And I hope we've got about 5 years to figure it out. I look at those muffler shops on the south side of Com Ave. Those are in Brookline. And I would rather see those be 6-story office space buildings where people can get off at the train station at West Station and come to work in Brookline. And those buildings are paying Brookline property taxes. And maybe we get some first floor retail and they're shopping at Brookline Merchants on Com Ave. There's a real opportunity. I know we don't always think about Com Ave's Brookline portion as part of our community. We sometimes forget, and that's forgivable, but it is. And we do have businesses. Their legal address is Boston because their front door is in Boston, but the entire rest of their business is in Brookline, right? And we want to support those as well. And West Station will be a tremendous opportunity to do that. It's going to require some zoning. It's going to require some leadership from folks like EDAB as well as Chamber of Commerce and so on and so forth. So it's something I just want to plant the seed on. We don't have to do anything right now, but it's coming. We also got some earmarks. Hey, I'm not too proud to ask. So we got $7 million to renovate, to essentially rebuild the St. Mary Street Bridge, which goes over the Pike. Again, it's very much on the edge of town, but it is real. We also got $2 million for general sidewalk and roadway repairs in Brookline. And the Rotary, there's a South Brookline Rotary that Representative Coppinger was adamant we rebuild, and he got that as well. Forgive me, I'm forgetting which one. I could look it up, I suppose. So that was a success. Also, as I said, there's some MBTA adjustments. One thing that was nice about that bill was that it actually reduces penalties for fare evasion. This is one of those structural racist policies we have that maybe we didn't mean to have, but if somebody beats a fare for $2.40, they probably don't need to go to jail for that, for $2.40. Like, if you've ever actually stood on a platform on the D line in the morning, you'll watch almost all people in Brookline get on and don't pay the fare because they get on in the rear door or the middle door. And most of them have monthly passes. Most of them, it's fine. So that was a positive change. The last thing about the transportation bond bill I want to mention quickly is there is a TNC fee increase, right? TNCs are Ubers and Lyfts. And the House and Senate both wanted to increase revenue there. The House passed it as part of a comprehensive transportation revenue package that included some more progressive items, as well as a gas tax, which I supported. The Senate wouldn't do it, but we did get the TNC fares. Now, there's really mixed feeling. I have very mixed feelings about it. Many folks perceive the people who ride TNCs as just being rich, right? I actually don't see it that way. In my observation, there's a couple of different folks who ride Ubers. I observe young people riding Ubers because they don't own a car, because their student loans are high and they're living 3 or 4 to an apartment and their jobs don't pay enough. And so they don't own a car. And every once in a while, they want to do something where riding on transit for an hour and a half just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so they'll pay the $12. My colleagues perceive Ubers and Lyfts as a luxury. I don't. Nevertheless, there is a fee. It has gone up, which I think is not great. What I do think is great, though, is that a substantial fraction of that increased revenue goes directly to the town from which the Uber or Lyft passenger entered. In the case of Brookline, Todd Crane estimates that revenue will be worth, I'm going to look it up so I get it wrong, don't get it wrong. See if I can find it. Here we go. Based on the 2019 rideshare numbers, had the fee we just put in place been in place in 2019, Brookline would have received $614,000 instead of $245,000. So roughly $350,000 a year of additional revenue. And that goes towards sidewalks, including things like street furniture and, wheelchair access and maintenance. It goes towards bicycle lanes and bicycle facilities, right? It's a real opportunity, I think, to improve our non-motorized transportation experience. And I hope that the business districts will be active in identifying opportunities for improvement of the streetscape, knowing full well that the town is going to have, again, if and when the governor signs, approximately $350,000 a year more to spend on those sorts of things specifically. I would add that, of course, this is based on 2019 numbers, right? I don't know that 2021 will have that kind of revenue because we're not starting off in a fully racing economy. And frankly, there aren't a whole lot of folks coming home late at night from the bars these days, which is safe and good, but unfortunate if you're a bar owner or an Uber driver. So that's the transportation bond bill. The economic development bill sounds like it's the most relevant, but it's a little tricky to talk about because it's a lot of bonding for big programs that already exist and will continue to exist. And that's to the good. It does not include sports betting. The House had wanted it. The Senate did not. The Senate won out on that. I suspect we will debate it again this coming session. It does include a similar language to the governor's housing production proposal, and that includes both financial and non-financial support for home construction. It also includes changing the zoning laws in the following sense. Currently, to change zoning, it takes a 2/3 vote from town meeting. If you want to change zoning up or down, left or right, any change at all is 2/3. Under the language in the economic development bill as proposed by the governor, what I would loosely describe as upzoning now requires a majority vote, not a 2/3 vote. So examples of upsizing would be increasing the permittable floor area ratio of a building, reducing the setbacks, reducing the minimum amount of parking, increasing the height limit, things like this. And they're detailed and it's worded very carefully. In general, will now require a majority vote from town meeting instead of 2/3. That is a substantial change. There are many folks who are thrilled about this. There are many folks who are terrified of this. I am both. I am thrilled because we need more housing in the Boston metropolitan area, and every community has a role to play, not just Boston and Cambridge. And some folks will say, oh, well, Boston had more people living in it 70 years ago than they did today. That's true. There were like families of 7 living in an 800 square foot apartment in Boston 60 years ago. I don't think that's the society we actually are arguing we should have now. Boston has been carrying a lot of weight in developing new housing for a variety of income levels. Cambridge has as well, other communities not so much. And I think we have a role to play in Brookline, and I hope we will do so. It's tricky. We do need to make sure we're able to provide quality services for folks who have lived here already and folks who are moving in, and we'll need to work at that. So I'm excited, though, about the opportunity. What concerns me is when you make a mistake with a leaf blowing bylaw, you can change it in 6 months or a year. And the people suffered some amount over that 6 months or a year, and the suffering stops. When you make a mistake with zoning, you get a building that is not ideal for its circumstance, and you will suffer due to that building 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, right? So I think it is reasonable and wise and prudent to be careful with zoning changes in a way we don't necessarily have to be careful in proposing changes to leaf blower bylaws. That doesn't mean we should move slowly. That means we should put in more resources, encourage more people to be involved, dig deep, and try to figure out how to make those changes reasonably quickly. To that end, that reminds me, I got to look it up because I want to get the language right. Oh, here we are. The Economic Development Bill, line 505. Provided further that not less than $285,000 shall be expended for the study of improvements to and redevelopment of commercial districts in the town of Brookline. That's nice. Now, I want to emphasize this is bond money, which means the legislature doesn't spend it. The legislature authorizes the governor to spend it, but he does not have to spend it. Bond money is not like operating money where the legislature spends it and it gets spent. It now becomes the job of me and Senator Cream and Representatives Moran and Coppinger and Elugardo. It becomes the job of the select board. It becomes the job of Mel Kleckner, and frankly, it becomes the job of like the transportation department, the planning department, to work the governor to release the money, to spend that money. It's good spend. We have to demonstrate to him that it's consistent with his priorities so that he spends it. And I believe this is consistent with his priorities. I believe that when we rethink zoning in commercial districts, we're going to think about residential on top of retail. And what is that? Those are captured customers. Those are the customers. It may not be enough for every business to survive, but no business should be worried. No coffee shop is going to do worse because people live above them. They're going to do better because everybody's buying coffee on the way out the door, right? And so I think there's an opportunity to sort of combine increases in housing, near transportation, and support for economic development in the same place at the same time. And we need to do it carefully. We need to think about the impact that construction has in the immediate sense on the neighbors. We want to make sure we're thoughtful about transportation for automobile users and everybody else. But professional help can't hurt. And so I was thrilled that we were able to secure that earmark in the economic development bill. We got two other earmarks directed for Brookline subsidized housing parcels related to renovations. And that's great too. Not as relevant for this group, but still to the good. So the zoning is a big deal. And that's going to be talked about statewide. I don't love the change in the following sense. I think that I would have rather seen the legislature use a shall instead of a may. This is a may, right? It says if a town wants to change zoning, it only needs 50% now, but it's still up to the town to decide if they want to do it. I would have rather seen something like accessory dwelling units, so-called mother-in-law apartments that meet this standard shall be legal in every single family home across the Commonwealth, right? I would have rather seen that because what I'm afraid we're going to see with something like this is the communities that are willing are going to carry all the weight. And the communities that continue to, people use the word snob, I won't, will do nothing differently. And this is very much, in my view, the kind of philosophy that Governor Baker uses in lots of governing, where he lets the coalition of the willing do the work for everyone. And I don't think that's really fair, but that's where we're at. And the legislature, in this case, agreed. So I just want to sort of circle back. We've got a $30 million loan program similar to the federal Paycheck Protection Program for businesses hurt by COVID-19. We've got so scanning for more things, community development lending, science and technology research, $6 million for supporting artists in local museums, $14 million for tourism. Something else I'm looking for, I'm sort of scanning. We go down at the bottom. We capped the fees that third-party delivery services can charge restaurants, right? This is the Uber Eats problem. It's capped at 15% of the price of the online order for the COVID-19 emergency. It only applies to restaurants with fewer than 25 locations. So, McDonald's delivery can charge what they want, I suppose. And I know that was something that folks had been interested in. There's also something for the arts. I'm looking for, here we go. No, that's not it. Yeah, there's commissions to study the negative impacts of changes on media and local journalism, and a commission to study how to help the arts community recover from the pandemic. It's not very much, and it's a little bit slow, but that was the best that we could get there. One of the big questions that was not resolved in this bill is unemployment insurance. And so, right, I don't know how much folks know, but I want to give just a simplistic story of what happens. There is an unemployment insurance trust fund that the state manages, and when it starts getting low, then it requires each and every business to pay more into it to catch it back up so it has enough money. Well, obviously, that fund has been eviscerated over the past 9 months. And so by law, if we do nothing, the payment that each business has to make in essentially payroll tax is pretty substantial. And this is hard, right? Because we need to maintain this fund. But if we put too much burden on businesses and they can't continue carrying on, they're not going to pay anything into the fund, and they're going to contribute more to the unemployment requirements. So it's a tricky balance. I expect we'll get something soon, but it's still unclear exactly how that's going to play. It's going to have to be paid eventually, right? And the question is, can we slow it down enough to be meaningful, but not so to the point that we're putting ourselves at risk of not having the money to pay out the unemployment should we need to? And that's really the balance. And a similar example of this, we talk about every once in a while, Newton talked about it this year, is the commercial property tax rate, which is typically roughly 175% of the residential rate. If you lowered it to 172%, would that really help the businesses? I mean, everything helps, but is that meaningful or not? And these sorts of discussions are important. Of course, it all adds up. It's all meaningful, but with limited resources, we've got to try to find that balance. So I want to stop for a minute and say, hey, there's a lot more that's in there. Happy to answer any questions about these 3 bills or anything else kicking around and give you the best answer I can.
Thanks, Tommy. Anne has a question in the chat box wondering whether online order for the delivery cap fee, does that include a tip or is it just the cost of the food?
I don't have the foggiest idea. No idea. We could sort of drill down into the language and try to make a guess, but I would think the tip is entirely exclusive. I would hope so. I think that would be the right thing to do, but I'm not certain that that's how it will play out.
Yeah, we can follow up with that. And I see Ben on the Q&A is asking a similar question about the policy cap. She might have missed Tommy's announcement earlier, but the legislation does include a delivery cap of 15% for restaurants with fewer than 25 locations. And it also as part of that legislature, as I understand it, makes it such that the delivery companies cannot reduce the payment to the deliverers themselves, which I think is an important piece. Great. And then we have, I'm sorry.
Clara is asking a question about TNC fees, which is a great question. And she asks, is it tied to traffic patterns or for pool riders? So the answer is that, to my knowledge, it is not tied to traffic patterns. I don't recall that, but it is tied to pool rides. So the observation is that folks carpool, there's less of an impact on congestion. That may or may not be true because it's not like people are necessarily getting in at the same place. But it is true that pooled riders do not have the fee increase. They will continue paying the fee that they have now. To my knowledge, there wasn't any public discussion about equity there. And it's an interesting question. On the one hand, it may be true that pooled riders result in less congestion. On the other hand, it may be true that someone like me is more comfortable sitting in the back seat with a perfect stranger than someone like Kathy, for example, right? Very much, it's easy if you are an able-bodied man to feel more comfortable in the back seat with a stranger at 10 o'clock at night than it might be for someone else. Nevertheless, that is what was done. There's quite a bit of language. I'm happy to send it along because I'm not actually at home. I can't hold up my little piece of paper that reminds folks, but I'll do this anyway. Really, really close. There we go. That's my phone number, 617-872-8921. And that's my personal email, which you're welcome to use. But I would actually encourage for State House issues, Tommy.Vitolo, Vitolo, at mahouse.gov. And getting it by email is great because it makes sure that I understand exactly what the question is. I can reply after getting some information and try to be as clear as I can. So I encourage you to email policy-related things. If you've got trouble and you need help, give me a call, 617-872-8921. And so, yeah, I'm happy, Clara, to dig into that a little more and get all of those details answered and get the language to you. If you're interested, just send me an email.
And Tommy, I think there was also, we're going to talk about the funding that is kind of backfilling the governor's announcement of another round of funding to small businesses through the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. But I think in addition to that, there's an additional $20 million set aside just for restaurants. I'm not sure if you know any more details about that yet.
Maybe. Let's see here. I'm not going to find it quick enough. Unfortunately, it's not a unique enough number.
Yeah.
$20 million shows up a lot in this bill. But I also want to flag that actually a round of grants just went out to a variety of Brookline businesses that are minority, women, or LGBTQ owned. And, there was a long list. There was maybe 20 businesses in Brookline that got, I think, between $25,000 and $50,000. The check should arrive in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If you were awarded this and you don't have a check by February 1st, call me. We will get on them. I will say that state government has not been as fast at cutting the checks in general as we would like. And, they need to be careful to worry about fraud and make sure that they're getting it right. That's important. But it's also important that this help get to people when they need it, not 2 weeks late. And so if you've been awarded that and you have any questions or hey, where's the money? Give me a call. We'll work on it. I was delighted to see a nice subset of businesses in Brookline, Michael's Deli, Martin's Coffee Shop, By Job, which is a pet groomer, I think. There was a number of, and there was a variety of health and beauty salons, which I go to 3 a week. You'd think I'd know their names. But they're great. And so that was great. And hopefully we'll see more of that coming.
Thank you for such a comprehensive, I know this is all still, hot off the press. So I really appreciate you jumping in and sharing it with us what you know. And I'm really excited that you flagged the issue about unemployment insurance. I know that my understanding is that the unemployment insurance jumped for our businesses by something like 60% from 2020 to 2021 already. And so, I hear you. We've got to figure out how to make that account be useful and it's got to be paid off. But it's good also to remember that there's already been a huge jump even just to this calendar year. And I will
say that there's also been some reticence in Massachusetts. I don't know if this is true in other states or not, because the federal government is, shall we say, erratic right now with respect to what packages are going to look like, where the assistance is going to be, what the requirements are going to be. There's some reticence for the state to fill in the hole, because if we fill in the hole and the government says we're only going to fill in holes, then Massachusetts doesn't get the money, right? Because we already fixed it. So we kind of like are deliberately not fixing some things just in case the federal government is going to fix them first. It's like, if you're in college and you're in a dorm, you're not in a dorm, you're in a living off-campus apartment, you don't go out and buy groceries the day before your mom visits, because she might notice the cabinets are empty and put some groceries in there, right? So you hold off. In some ways, that's what state government is doing. If there's going to be federal money, we don't want to not get it because we already fixed the problem.
Got it.
In the meantime, that creates this hole, right? There's this problem where somebody needs this to be fixed now and it's not getting fixed. And that's frustrating. And it's sort of a, darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of problem. There's very little knowing for what the future holds out of the Congress and the presidency over the next 6 or 8 weeks.
Yep. Jen also has a question. She says, are these grants the first or second round of the MGCC grants? I think, Tommy, you're talking about those from the first round that were announced.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think they were like the second tranche of the first round. I mean, they've sort of come out and it spaced a little bit, but I'm not an expert. I'm not certain of that. And
Jen, we're going to talk about this in just a little bit, but the second round is open now, and it's not first come, first serve. It's open until I think January 15th. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And we'll have to find out more about how and when the funding just for restaurants is going to be dispersed. I don't have any information about that yet. Great.
Well, thanks so much for doing what you do and for hanging in. I think that, it's going to be tough slogging until about March. And then I think things will get steadily better and better and better until we're back to normal again. I think that's it. I think that will be the worst of it. The combination of better weather and vaccinations are going to double up and coincide with, I think, a brighter day, a brighter year, certainly for America. And there's a lot to be excited about. So hold on tight, keep working hard, and we're gonna get through this.
Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for showing us how the process works and being so accessible to us when we have questions or.
Oh, I mean, get a couple of whiskeys or beers in me, and the things I could tell you, but not at 9:30 in the morning.
Hopefully very soon.
Be well, everyone. I'm gonna head off to the next one.
Bye. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Great. Okay, so we have a couple more announcements, and some of them we've kind of hinted at, but I'll first talk about the state and federal small business relief grant funding. So the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP funding, it was just announced that there is a second round that has been approved and funded, but the application process is not yet open. As soon as we get information about that, we'll post it in the town's business news flash notification, and Meredith will put a link in the chat box if you're not already on our email list. And that round will be for those that either did not get funding in the first Paycheck Protection Program funding, or got one but also suffered significant revenue losses, which I think probably includes everybody, at least on this call. So that's that. And then at the state level, we were hinting at this talking with Representative Vitolo. There's state grant funding through the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. That's part of a $668 million relief package. It includes two programs. One is to recapitalize that small business program, which launched in October. And secondly, to provide additional funding for businesses that fall into industries, specific industry sectors. So that first round was very transparently, very clear that it was preferring people of certain demographics, who are business owners. This second round is preference by business sector, including restaurants, bars, independent retailers, indoor recreation and entertainment, personal services, event support companies. And we'll put a link to that application also in the chat box. It's www.empoweringsmallbusiness.org. So this second round of application is open. It opened on December 31st, and it will close on Friday, January 15th. And just to close the loop of a question that was asked at a previous town hall meeting, somebody asked whether the program could be tweaked because in the first round, it did not allow anybody that had any outstanding state tax payments to apply for the program. We did inquire about that flexibility. We have not heard an answer about that. And as far as we can tell, they're not changing the rules on that. But we did ask, and we will let you know if anything changes with that. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. It seemed like a very reasonable request. So if any of you applied in the first round of MGCC's business relief program back in October, you do not need to reapply to the second round. You do not need to do anything. If you've already applied, you do not need to reapply. And then finally, we wanted to mention an important resource that's always been there, but they're kind of upping some of their programming right now online, and that's the Center for Women in Enterprise. They're hosting regular workshops and webinars on applying for both federal and state grant programs. As Representative Vitola mentioned, if the federal government does start releasing some of these funds and programs, we'll be in another phase of trying to push out information as clearly and kind of in one package to you all through our email news blast. But the Center for Women in Enterprise is also holding workshops on how to apply to those different programs, both at the federal and state level. And we'll also put in a link to how you can subscribe to the Center for Women in Enterprises newsletter so that you can stay up to date on programming as the year moves forward. Let's see, I think next Meredith is gonna do a couple more updates about the Winter Small Business Initiatives and then some Q&A and wrap up.
Good morning, everyone. Happy 2021. Just a couple of updates. In late December or mid-December, the town announced a series of initiatives that were either created or extended to support businesses through the winter months of the pandemic. Most notably, the town launched a winter outdoor dining pilot program. And all of these initiatives are due to expire March 31st. And the winter outdoor dining pilot program is different from dining pre-December in that restaurants that had outdoor dining in parking spaces are required to fortify those areas with concrete jersey barriers that are provided and installed and removed by the town at no cost to the business. So if you see outdoor dining about in town, it's part of the winter outdoor dining program. The fortified outdoor dining areas and the parking spaces are going to be a feature of the spring outdoor dining program that we're going to announce later this winter. So stay tuned for more on that. The other initiatives, we received feedback from retailers and restaurants in late fall, early winter, that they were concerned that given the capacity constraints in their businesses, customers wouldn't have a place to comfortably queue or wait for food orders or for something to be brought out to them. So we are launching what we're calling a pop-up tent program. So these are, if you submit a certificate of liability insurance to our transportation administrator, Todd Corain, and on a case-by-case basis, they're approving these pop-up tents, which are temporary sheltered areas that are put up and taken down at the end of every day. There's also, we've extended the 15-minute delivery only parking spaces, which went up back in March. They're going to be extended to the end of March as well. And if those continue to be important and valuable to businesses, please give us that feedback because we'd certainly like to extend it if it's going to be helpful to businesses. You can request those by emailing me. And we also, two other things, sandwich boards in town, fun fact, they're technically illegal, but during COVID, we've temporarily allowed those. And we've also temporarily allowed displaying retail goods outside of on the sidewalk space adjacent to storefronts. Again, if you submit certificate of liability insurance, you're able to take advantage of both of those programs. And just an opportunity to encourage businesses to really try to adhere to the letter of the law. I'm going to include a link to more specifics about all of those programs, but especially with the sandwich boards. The Small Business Development Committee has talked about submitting a warrant article in the spring or maybe in the fall that proposes to legalize sandwich boards, which we've received feedback is an important way for businesses to communicate with customers and people passing by. And the sandwich boards were banned in the town because there were so many issues in terms of challenges to pedestrian accessibility or ADA access on our sidewalk. So if businesses can just make sure that they submit their certificate of liability insurance to Todd, so they're in compliance, and that they're really, conscious of the fact that maintaining accessibility on our sidewalks. I think that would be really helpful when we have those discussions in town meeting about making sandwich boards a permanent and legal part of our commercial areas. So I'm going to include a link to announcements and more information. If you have any questions, please let us know. All right, so we had a good Q&A session with Rep. Batolo. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box or raise your hand. I know we're coming towards the end of our hour here. All right, well, I will hand it back to Kara, and if we have any other questions that come up in these last few minutes, great.
Great. So our next virtual town hall meeting for small businesses and nonprofits will be on February 4th at 9 a.m. And in the meantime, you can reach out to Meredith or I anytime with questions or concerns, and we'll put our emails in the wrap-up box. Thanks to everybody who jumped on the call today. And please remember, if you haven't already, to sign up to our email news blast so that you get information as the second that we have it and can get it out. Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good morning.